Where were you and what were you doing when you heard Elvis had passed?
Well, I was in London and I actually came back from a record fair that evening and I had a load of Elvis stuff with me, a load of EPs. And they came on the news, the English news, the ITN with Reginald Broadcast. He said the news that Elvis is dead. He said, first of all, he's ill or he may have a heart attack. He said in a moment, then there was a news flash and he said he was dead. So I went down to a record shop where I was and I bought up every Elvis thing and he didn't even know he was dead. And he was the first manager with Thin Lizzy, a guy called Teddy Carroll. He had a shop called Rock On in London, in Camden Town. And I bought it, as I walked out there, I said, oh, by the way, Elvis has died last night. He said, yeah. I said, I might die as well. He didn't believe me. But I left it at that. Till he went out and bought the paper. And he said, you bought all my stuff, I could have made money. Well, I said, I paid the price you were asking for. I already told you he was dead, you didn't believe me.
Okay, August in England, before 16th of August, 77. Elvis was still huge. From a British point of view, he was making a comeback to rock and roll music. He had songs like Way Down, Moody Blue, For the Heart, etc. So his career, as far as the Brits were concerned, you know, he was really turning round and going back to his rock and roll roots again. And you know, his songs at that time were hitting the charts, but they weren't quite getting as high as they should be. They're still getting in the top 10, but they'd only sort of reach number 9, number 7 or something like that. And then that fateful day on August 16th, 1977, it changed everything. Within a week, Way Down was number 1 in the charts again. It stayed at the top of the charts for 6 weeks solid. Every album in the top 20 was almost Elvis Presley. The week following his death, everybody just rushed out and they bought every album, every t-shirt, every cassette tape, every picture of Elvis, every bit of memorabilia you could imagine. So it wasn't necessarily music, it could have been books, etc. But if it had Elvis's picture on it or Elvis's name on it, they bought it. But going back to the music, certainly at one point every song in the top 20, sorry, every album in the top 20 was an Elvis album, at least for a week.
1977, I was 10 years old, and I don't have a vivid recollection. I do remember hearing the news on the television, and I remember a sadness about the home. At that point in time, I just didn't really grasp what had happened. And as the older I grew, the more I came to realize, you know, just how special the man was, and how I wish I could have at least one time just to seen him in concert. And that, to me, that would have been awesome. And I really don't think people realized what they had until he was gone.
I was coming back from the doctor's office. I had a back injury and was reporting back to work. Pulled into the parking lot at work and had the radio on, and bam, they dropped the bomb and announced that Elvis had died.
Oh yeah, I was 14 years old, and a friend of my father's come running down the driveway. We were at my parents' cottage, and he comes running down and says, Bobby, Elvis died. I'm like, I can't. Elvis didn't die. You're joking with me. No. Turn the radio on. Turn the TV on. You know. So it was. I mean, it was just a shock. You know, we all rushed to the TV set, and, you know, crying and all that kind of stuff because, you know, Elvis doesn't die.
Sure do. I was coming out of 8th grade. I was in 8th grade, and I had just gotten home from school when I learned that he died. I lived 2 blocks away. My mama was in the house watching it. It was all over the news. And we sat down. My mom was a big Elvis fan. My dad as well. My dad's originally from Mississippi, and so I guess maybe that part of the way I grew up with the liking of Elvis.
Some little girl came up and told me, said that he passed away, the neighbor, and I said, get out of here. And I didn't believe her. And it was true. And it's, everybody, no matter what, they know where they were when he passed on.
Well, I was a bartender for 26 years, and I was bartending, and they had broke into a song and said that Elvis Presley had passed away. And I yelled out, you know, Elvis Presley had passed away, y'all shut up. And shut up, and even my mother said, well, you must have misunderstood it. And then after the song was over with, they came back and said it had confirmed that he had passed away. Well, I couldn't work the rest of the day. You know, I had to take off because I was so upset. And you can see now I'm tearing up. I just, you know, it just upset me so bad.
I was in my living room back in Perth, Western Australia. I was 10 years old, and it came on the radiogram. I heard it then.
Yeah, I was at work, and I got a call from my mother she called work because she knew I'd hung out with him and all, and I was, in shock. I mean, I even left work and went to his aunt's house, Lorraine Smith, and we hung out there a while. Everybody's pretty sad.
I was in the photography business at that time. I was living in Denver, Colorado, and I went to a customer's house to do a family picture. And when I walked in the door, the lady said, "Elvis just died." And I just like everybody else, I was in shock. I told her that's the worst thing she could have told me at that time because I had to make them laugh in the pictures, and I wasn't in a laughing mood after I heard Elvis had passed away. So.
I was in my neighbor's backyard playing on the swing set, getting beat up by my little that's a girl that was a neighbor, and my mom came out and told me that Elvis was dead, and I ran home, and we all couldn't believe it, and we all cried together.
I was at Southbrook Mall Barbershop where Vernon was coming in. I'd moved from the Whitehaven Shopping Center, and I was cutting hair the day that he passed away, and breaking news came, and it was a sad day.
I was working. I work at a grocery store, and a friend of mine that knew I was an Elvis fan was off work that day, and he came in the back door and said he had just heard that on the car radio, and I said, "Yeah, right." You thought it was a sick joke. And then I realized he wasn't kidding me. And then my dad called me, and when my dad called me, I knew that it was the real thing. But everybody knew I was going to be upset, so they called. But I just couldn't believe it. I didn't think he was ever going to go.
Elvis's death affected the world in a great deal. It was a state of mourning and everything else. Folks around the country lowered their flags and everything. It was a very hard thing for a lot of the fans that he had finally passed away.
I was in the backyard, my mom's house when I was still living there, and she said Elvis died, and I kind of just let it go. I just didn't even want to think about it. That was about it. And it was probably not until the 25th anniversary of my first visit here that it actually sunk in that he actually really died.
I was in the medical center. I was in the lab working, and I was painting the lab, believe it or not. I remember people started calling me that day, and I couldn't believe it. And I turned the radio on and said he had passed away, and it was sad. And I remember driving home that day. I was in traffic, bumper to bumper, and every radio station was playing Elvis music, and I was just looking over, and everybody was crying. Women, men were just, you could see they were just like losing a real close family member. It was really sad.
7 years old.
Do you remember it at all?
I remember that day just like everyone. My mother actually came in my room. I was actually in the bed, asleep again, and told me about it. I remember that day. I remember being in bed. I had bunk beds, and I was sleeping on the bottom bunk, and my mother came in the room and said Elvis had died. 7 years old.
I had just awakened from a night of performing. I started performing in 1971 as an Elvis tribute artist, and I had awakened after having a show, and my wife came to my house and told me she had been shopping, and she said, "I just heard on the radio that Elvis Presley died." And so I went to the television. First I told her, "Don't joke like that." And she said, "I'm not joking." She said, "The radio said Elvis died." So I turned on the television, and sure enough, the first thing I saw on the 5 o'clock news was the late, great king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, died today. And that was one of the hardest things I think I've endured. It was like I lost my mother. It was horrible.